Irina, you're muted.
Sorry?
You can unmute it, Biggie. Yes.
Yes, now I'm with you. So hello, hello everyone. Now please welcome to our last session. So, and I'm Marina Busegina from St. Petersburg, from the High School of Economics, and I'm going to chair this session. And the title of this session is US Policy in Ukraine and Central Asia. And for this panel, we have four presenters, namely Mikhail, Volodymyr, Sebastian, and Alexander. But we will do it in a slightly different order to package all the Ukrainian papers first, and then we will move to Central Asia with Sebastian. And well, we each presenter, as it was exactly in the previous sessions, each presenter. Oh, I'm so sorry, Melinda. So we have our fantastic discussion. So this is Melinda, and this is very nice that you are with us. So, and now, because this is it is important with the time constraint. So each presenter has 8 minutes, and I will do exactly what has been done, what Elizabeth has done in the previous session. So I will switch off my video and I will switch it on after 7 minutes, so that you will know that you have 1 minute only left. So, and our first presenter is Mikhail Alexey, and Mikhail Alexey is a San Diego, is the Bruce E. Porter's Professor of Political Science at San Diego State University. So, Mikhail, please, the floor is yours.
All right, I'm going to share the screen with my PowerPoint, and we're going to move on. So, do you guys see it?
Yes, we do.
All right, so here we go. I'm sharing the screen and I'm ready to roll. And this paper is based on the analysis of opinion survey from Ukraine. I'll give you the bottom line up front. There's a strong reservoir of goodwill toward the United States and Ukraine. And the things that evoke most strongly positive resonance, and that, by the way, cuts across various regions and social groups, is support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, for military collaboration with NATO, which is not quite the same as membership in NATO, but military collaboration, support for Ukraine technological high-tech industries, the Ukrainian culture as well. The interesting finding is that there was no significant relationship between assessment of US policy and people who believe that democracy is important or that fighting corruption is important. So with the kind of a message that making those into standalone policy, disconnected, or even making other things contingent on those things is not going to win hearts and minds. And finally, the couple of no-nos that the policy of the US toward Ukraine is viewed not so much as what US does directly to Ukraine, but how it relates to other actors and specifically Russia. So I'll show you some empirical evidence on that. So the advice would be, do not discount Russian aggression threat and do not be friendly with Putin. So these would be the outtakes from the data. So let's look at the data. It comes from the late October-November 2020 survey. And I thank my collaborators, especially Evgen Holovacha and Serhiy Dembitsky at the Institute of Sociology, Ukrainian National Academy of Sciences, with whom I've been working the last 5 years on these projects. And in this final paper survey, there was the data. So there were 3 aspects that I look at in terms of US policy. One is how important it is to have relations with the US, how compatible it is with Ukraine national interests, and how beneficial it is for Ukraine domestically. So what you see is 83% see it as priority and more than 50% as high priority. You also interestingly see the net positive view of US influence on Ukraine domestically. Some cause for concern is the high level of indeterminate respondents on influence and interests, and also the fact that most Ukrainians actually see national interests as not compatible. But the mitigating factor there is that the way the question is worded, not compatible, doesn't mean hostile or conflictual, right? It simply means that there are different interests. And obviously, of course, if you're in Ukraine, you understand that the United States may have many different influences. So with that consent, I'll show you this heat map based on logistic regression analysis that looks kind of behind those evaluations, what drives these assessments, and the clearest, strongest predictors are the importance to see Ukraine developing science and technology, reviving its culture, and being safe from external aggression. The interesting thing I found was on science and technology, that I kind of included that question almost on spec. I expected, for example, income to be a stronger predictor, but it's not necessarily how people feel the economic effects, but the specific areas, the kind where they see Ukrainian national interests and future as more important. You also saw that the region mattered in the East. That's a very predictable line. You know, you see less support and less positive view toward the East. But the interesting point here is on the blue dots, the priority of relations with the United States is not below, negative in any of the regions. Even in the East, it's kind of indeterminate, but in the South also, it's almost significantly higher than the midpoint. Now, that is the chart that shows the importance of geopolitics in viewing relations with the US. It's in the context of the relations pretty much with Russia and the threat of Russian military aggression. The whiskers there show that respondents who see Russian aggression as a threat to Ukraine are significantly more likely to be positive and to see US and Ukraine interests as compatible, even in the East. But it's interesting how those views kind of get equalized from west to center to south. Whereas among those people who don't see the threat, you can see kind of diminution of positive assessment from west to east, but at the with the Russian aggression, it's like the great equalizer. So obviously that's the biggest factor. And the same with military collaboration with NATO. On all the dimensions of US policy view that I looked at, there is a huge and significant difference between those who, support military cooperation with NATO and those who don't. That's an interesting chart because it also indicates kind of the interplay between economic and geopolitical factors. In essence, what you see in the regions, in a region like the West, where historically there's a stronger support for Euro-Atlantic membership and joining institution, income disparity don't play a role. The differences are not significant. But as you move toward the East, and especially in the East, the income becomes a progressively significant difference. So in terms of US policy, I guess what can win some heart and minds is if there is an economic assistance or collaboration policy or some kind of joint business development targeting the East and raising the levels of well-being in the Eastern Ukraine in particular, and in the South to an extent, would be most beneficial. The Russian media does do damage to these relations, and it's the difference is very significant in the center. In the West and in the East, where views are maybe more kind of formed and entrenched anyway, the media doesn't make that much difference. But respondents who say that most of their news come from sources based in Russia and who are in the central Ukraine, they seem to view compatibility of US and Ukraine interests less negative. And now I had the data for some other years, but that was only on the approval ratings. And here you see the Russian factor very well. If you look from the bottom up, so the first 2 years are Obama, and then the last 3 years are Trump. There's a kind of watershed change, right? Obama is viewed predominantly positively, then Trump is viewed predominantly negatively. And I think those two photos illustrate the difference, with Trump calling, being never criticizing Putin and calling Putin a strong leader and holding a very friendly summit with him. You see diminution of support for him in Ukraine. That's also a very interesting data point because it shows that in Ukraine, people who thought positively and highly of Putin also thought positively and highly of Trump. But that was not the case for Obama. And so for Biden, of course, and for US policy in general, I think the question arises, think of Ukraine when you think of Russia. How would it resonate? Is it worth trading off some uncertain benefits of cooperation with Russia for a very solid kind of potential partnership, a reliable, friendly nation of 43 million people in the heart of Europe? So that would be the big policy question. And don't forget that Ukraine is at war. The Ukrainian president has to visit the front lines. That is happening on the territory. And of course, without Russia's support, it would not be happening. You see that pictures of military buildup in April, and across the board, if you look at Ukrainian respondents in any year, the presidential approval is significantly higher. That is US presidential approval, significantly high among those who see Russia as the principal actor against Ukraine in the Donbass. So if you kind of very briefly identify potential areas for cooperation, well, the Javelin missiles that you see here, the Coast Cutters, the joint Air Force exercise is important, but those other ones on the two other slides, probably more, you know, the joint production of Huey helicopters that is starting there, the Moto Sich collaboration on aircraft engines. There are other areas, you know, Ukraine was the largest producer of intercontinental ballistic missiles in the Soviet Union, Antonov aircraft manufacturer. Anyway, the high-tech collaboration, particularly related to areas where Ukraine can increase its deterrence, its national security, would be the biggest winners. And finally, well, regarding corruption, well, what if all this is squandered? Well, to that I will say that, like in Afghanistan, well, Ukraine is not Afghanistan, and it really has big geopolitical factors and identity that work against that kind of comparison. It's strongly Euro-Atlantic. Democracy importance is very deeply rooted in society. And, you know, there is the factor of Russian military threat that was not there in Afghanistan. So with that, I would say, you know, onward and upward. And let's not forget the Ukrainian toast, Budmo, which is let us be. Thank you, guys.
I can stop smiling and even laughing. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mikhail, for this wonderful start of our session and being so emotional. And now, so I passed up, but please, all the other participants, please remember that 8 minutes, this is 8 minutes and not 12 minutes. Thank you very much in advance. And now I pass the floor to Volodymyr Dubovik, who is Associate Professor at the Department of International Relations at Mechnikov National University, Odessa, Ukraine.
Right, thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be here today. Good to see you all. I guess that qualifies for seeing each other these days. But anyway, it's better than nothing. So we were hoping to meet in person, but that never meant to happen. So let's go straight to the subject of US-Ukraine relations, which has been addressed in a certain way by Misha already. US-Ukraine relations are in a good state right now. That's my point of view. Not everyone agrees on both sides of the Atlantic. A lot of experts here in Ukraine would disagree with me, but I think it's neither all-around complete success story, nor it's a failure, nor it's in crisis. It's really somewhere in between. And the last recent visit by Zelensky to Washington has been a good attempt to take temperature, really, of the bilateral relations, and that was a good visit, I think. Even though a lot of people here in Ukraine, again, they've taken this politicized views of the visit. Some say it's unprecedented success, you know, it's a breakthrough, it's really different, higher level of relations. Others say it's complete failure. Zelensky came back empty-handed. And both of those extremes are not true, obviously. And the truth is somewhere in between and actually closer to the success mark, I think, because actually the optics were good. There are a lot of agreements were signed that confirm that relations are versatile, that they run across along a lot of spheres. So the spectrum is huge. ranging from security and defense all the way to energy and trade and science preparation and other things. The meeting, which was planned for 1 hour, went for 2 hours, not bad at all. I think Zelensky actually got his moment in Washington, in White House, and that was already very important as well. So the main thing to me that the visit actually took place, because a little bit background, we don't have enough time, but of course Zelensky wanted this visit back in 2019, and but the only thing he encountered was a Trump's pressure and a scandal, and Ukraine becoming entangled in that scandal, and that was a trauma for this administration here in Ukraine. And I think they're still having this, living through this lingering effect of that trauma, of that trust in bilateral relations being hurt through the 2019 and then impeachment hearings, when Ukraine was dragged again and again through the hearings. And then Zelensky was actually having high hopes for the new administration of Joe Biden, only not to find Joe Biden willing to have this big embrace for Zelensky. In fact, a lot of people came up with this notion of benign neglect by this new administration. I don't necessarily agree fully with this classification, but yes, there was an understanding on the American part that US-Ukraine relations do not necessarily call for some urgent measures, except for active coordination on the American side when the Russian escalation was happening on our borders in the spring. Back in the spring, actually, Washington moved very quickly into the situation and talked to Moscow, and talked to Kyiv, talked to its allies in the West to support Ukraine. Except for that particular moment, not much of urgency was felt in Washington, because I actually think in US that American US-Ukraine relations are working just fine. The format is there, the framework is there. That's why I called my memo the framework and the frictions, because the framework is there. Actually, last visit, only reaffirmed the relationship, and we now have we're going back to strategic partnership to the extent that there will be a commission on strategic partnership. We now have this framework agreement in the defense sector, which is not revolutionary, not really breakthrough, nothing new, but that's good. But on the Ukrainian side, unfortunately, Zelensky probably is trying to play a few tricks here and there. Some of them are in reaction, I suppose. It's my position that he is retaliating against some criticism against about the pace of reforms here in Ukraine, and not enough being done in terms of corruption. That's nothing new, unfortunately, for the previous administrations here in Ukraine. We had a similar situation. When you help us, when you give us money, when you give us kind of a carte blanche and a blank check and everything, we like you. When you start criticizing us for not doing something, not doing our homework, that becomes a problem, and people here in Kyiv become vindictive. So that's a song which we heard before, or a movie we've seen before, and unfortunately Zelensky is trying some of that too. And I think it's also an impact of 2019, when he learned that you can actually play tricks and games, and maybe bluffing and maybe a little bit blackmailing. That's what Trump tried to do to Kyiv back then, 2 years ago, and that's what Zelensky trying to do now. When someone who is close to him is saying, "Oh, West doesn't like it, so why don't we try and rebalance to China?" I mean, and everyone's like, "What? What are you talking about?" Anyone who is a sane politician here or an expert, they say it's not possible. Obviously, it's just statements, rhetorics, but for some reason it's been done. Or quite recently, the quite capable and adept foreign minister of Ukraine, Mr. Kuleba, is saying, again, the West doesn't like us, so we're going to have to become something like Israel, strong, militaristic, self-sustained, and so on. But I mean, again, tell it to those people who are now being debating in the House, paying that amount for the maintenance of Iron Dome. That Israel is, after all, it turns out, is self-sustaining and so on. But that's a different subject. So in Zelensky, I think we're having him trying to boast his domestic ratings primarily. So many of his statements that seem to be directed at Biden or Washington are actually directed at Ukrainian domestic consumption, Ukrainian domestic audience. He's trying to boost his ratings, and it's helping him. He came to bring in his position to bring peace. He didn't manage to do that, and he got quickly disappointed with what he can do, and discovered the limits of what he can do in dealing with Putin and the Normandy format and things like that. And then, then he was kind of in an apathy, not doing much. And then, frankly, he was reinvigorated recently in a couple, 2 or 3 months, when he started making the statements. And unfortunately, of course, when he says that the US should decide which side it's on, is it on Russian or Ukrainian, it's not fair, and it's not being called for. I mean, basically, US-Ukraine relations are in good state, like I said, and there is no need to fix something which is not broken, rock the boat in the middle of the ocean. I think that we should probably focus on doing our homework, and that would really increase our opportunities in the future, our perspectives in dealing with our American friends. Because unlike it is here in Kiev, where some people really focus on security and defense at the expense of focusing on reforms and corruption, in Washington, it's always been a dual priority for Ukraine. You need to focus on aggression on the front line without quotation marks, and also on your domestic front line with quotation marks, reforms fight against corruption. And those two are connected in the eyes of Washington. And this particular administration of Joe Biden, who was responsible for Ukraine for 8 years when he was the vice president, is going to be hammering this down. And Ukraine has signed the joint statement, which is a checklist, which is a kind of a homework where you have particular commitments by Ukraine. And no one in Kyiv, I'm afraid, if they think so, they're mistaken. No one will be in a position to say we didn't know what is expected of us because you've signed that statement. So we are in for, I'm cautiously optimistic, for more cooperation in various fields. But of course, it would require on both sides more work to be done in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was optimistic and at the same time responsible. Thank you for this expertise, and please. So this is I address them to the audience. We want to have your questions. We want to have your comments, and please prepare them. And now I pass the floor to Alexander Sushko, who is the executive director of the International Renaissance Foundation. This is Kiev, Ukraine. Alexander, please.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank organizers for allowing me to speak without sending the memo this time. I will do it just in a few days. It was my failure, unfortunately, but thank you for this. And I'm ready now to provide a little bit alternative perspective to what I heard from the brilliant presentations of two previous speakers. Here, maybe my perspective will look like less optimistic. However, it is important to understand what perspective we may have next if the current trade may persist, and then if there is a negative developments may continue, and so what we can realistically expect in the end. So main point of my presentation says the following: the most likely the next government of Ukraine will be less pro-Western than the current one. And this is it also true that most likely if Zelensky continues to be a president, his next years will be also less pro-Western than the current one. And then I will proceed with certain observations and the arguments which make me, which just determine me to have such conclusions. So my observation is the following. So currently, this pro-Western identity and the overall political course of Ukraine is facing significant challenges ahead. And the big one, the biggest one, I think that the lack of certain big ideas or which are able to consolidate and energize both society and political elites to mobilize them to do something significant. I have a constant observation, and I see that there is less and less enthusiasm here in Kiev on the European and Euro-Atlantic perspective of Ukraine. And we have to be serious about this, even if, according to the poll which Alexey presented, well, and I agree, this is a still continuous public opinion support for European integration, for Western direction, whatever, for reforms. However, there is also growing trend of which we may say, we may identify as isolationist attitude. And there is a growing popularity of the narrative which says that Ukraine should stand on its own. And this is a very popular slogan. I understand that maybe it is sometimes used for some political bargain and manipulation as well. But we have to acknowledge that most likely the political campaign of the future, in next elections, will be based on this system of coordinates. So, which will be a little bit different from the dilemma which we used to face previously, when usually Ukraine faced debates between more pro-Western and pro-Russian, pro-Eastern directions. Now, most likely, we will face a race of isolationist narratives and relevant political options. I just would like to quote the President Zelensky, who was asked recently at the conference in Kiev, what is his major take from the COVID-19 crisis. And he said that the major lesson he learned is that we all found ourselves in a world where everyone is just for himself. And that was accepted with certain enthusiasm, indicating that, again, COVID is not alone. There are many factors which contribute to this perception, but after COVID worlds includes much more egoism and much more isolationism in the mainstream of political thinking. In Ukraine, we will see the evolution of various political actors. Probably the most famous of them is Yulia Tymoshenko, whom you know long ago, who was probably the oldest, I would say, on the stage. She was known for his leadership in the Orange Revolution, and it was 18 years ago, and then she also was a political prisoner of Yanukovych. And then it's very interesting evolution of her. At that time, he was considered to be a leader of pro-Western, pro-European opposition. Now it's totally changed, and her narrative is mostly about protection of Ukraine against so-called external governance. So the Western powers which impose its will, reforms, whatever, which are not corresponding to the domestic Ukrainian interests, which are rather corresponding to the interests of external lobbyists, whoever they are. And so this is one particular case, but there are also some other people, stories, and trends which really help us to identify this problem. If nothing happens, and if there will be no change of this reality, probably we will see the big debate in Ukraine between pro-Western, traditional pro-Western narrative and strong Eurosceptical narrative and the Western skeptical narrative. And the major weapons of these narratives will be that the Western direction does not fully satisfy the Ukrainian needs. It does not bring any results, I mean, tangible results in the sense of membership in the EU and NATO are not available in any foreseeable perspective. And this is undermining the overall national strategy, which was built on the premise that Ukraine one day becomes EU member and the NATO member. And if this perspective totally fails, at this moment we cannot be much optimistic on that. At certain point, the people will say, so there is no way for us to fulfill promises, and that is why we need to change it. We need to rely on our own. And then, so my perception is that it goes even further. I think that if not conflict with Russia, if not the war with Russia today and last 7 years, it already could happen. So Ukraine would already have an isolationist government and the mainstream with no sentiments on the future European integration, just because it is not available. It's not practically achievable. And I understand that even many intellectuals would share this approach, as far as because there is no practical alternative. So that I would say that when it comes to the realistic expectation, what happens with Ukrainian political stage in the nearest future, I think that we have expect more, I would say, Euroscepticism, more isolationist, more such attitude which will not make us happy, and probably that may provide additional crisis. However, under current circumstances, I consider this option as the most viable perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alexander, for your expertise. And frankly speaking, you kind of expanded my personal thinking of Ukraine, because I cannot understand how the isolationist perspective of Ukraine is practically possible. But thank you. This is indeed food for thought. And now, now we have our fourth speaker, and this will be Sebastian Pirouz, who is a research professor at the Institute for European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies at the George Washington University, US. Sebastian, please.
Thank you so much. So now we're actually moving from Ukraine to Central Asia. I mean, my memo is on Muslim civil society and Central Asia, which is actually based on an ongoing research project on Muslim civil society and Central Asia, which I'm conducting with my colleague Emil Nasruddinov, who works at the American University in Bishkek, so in Kyrgyzstan. And this is actually this memo is a shortened version of a report which is entitled "Is there room for more engagement with Muslim civil society in Central Asia?" Disaggregating its multiple components, approaches, and goals, and which is going to be published in October next month by the United States Institute of Peace. So why research on Islamic civil society? Well, in contemporary Western discussions on the future of Central Asia, the topic and the role of Muslim civil society are, I would say, often ignored or left aside due to a lack of information, or it is even avoided due to political concerns. Muslim civil society has been frowned upon, for example, for not defending the values of the classic NGOs world and not necessarily endorsing Western-style parliamentary democracy. And moreover,
I believe something is wrong. This is only me that, okay, so what's now?
No, it's not just you.
No, it's not just me, it's you. So you see me, right? You see how I move, right? So this is okay.
Yeah.
Right, so, and what is, so something happened to
Sebastian
him,
is frozen,
right?
yeah. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I think it's his connection.
Yeah. He's frozen.
If he doesn't come back, maybe we can just go to the next speaker. And
He's the last speaker.
And
He's our
then,
last speaker.
oh,
We-
yes,
we-
that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
so
we
he's
could
our-
jump to Ukraine. We could jump to Ukraine and then let him come in at the end if you want to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, then we can do that. So then Melinda. So this is now we turn to the, because of the kind of these reasons, we turn to our discussion. So this is Melinda Herring is the deputy director of the Atlantic Council Eurasia Center. Melinda, please.
Thank you so much. If he comes back on, you just give me a signal and I'll stop. Hi,
No,
everyone.
no, you should not stop. We will do it then
Okay.
afterwards. But you don't
Okay.
stop, Melinda.
You're the boss.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you on Friday afternoon. Congratulations to the organizers. This is a really great discussion. So let's dig into Ukraine. I think this is three interesting perspectives. Alexander Shushko, I think, provides a helpful corrective. And he points out that people are not going to wait forever for their demands to be realized. And I think that's a pretty central point. I have not read Alexander's paper. He's still working on it. So I would like to see some data on that point, and I would like to see him substantiate some of the arguments that he made in his verbal presentation. I will say, though, I follow Ukraine pretty closely, and for a long time, I've been hearing the attitude that he was giving, that if the West isn't going to deliver, that we're going to have to rely on ourselves, and we're going to have to turn to a more Israeli model. And that's an opinion, like Volodymyr said, that the foreign minister, Dmitry Kuleba, is now saying publicly. So I think, Alexander, I would recommend that when you write up your paper, do go back to polling data and show and try to substantiate the argument that the pro-Western orientation is facing a big challenge, and there's less and less enthusiasm about Euro-Atlantic integration, because that's not immediately obvious in the polling that I've seen. So I would love to see different polling. I think you're right, though, that there's disappointment with the West. There's disappointment after the Zelensky visit with NATO, with the peacekeeping, with the Minsk protocols, and with Nord Stream 2. There was extreme disappointment with Nord Stream 2. And then after Zelensky came, President Zelensky was expecting Biden to make a decision on NATO, and he was expecting the United States to jump in and say that it would play a new role, that it would reinvigorate the Minsk protocols. I think this is a bigger problem, though. And Volodymyr, if you go back and revise your paper, I would urge you to make a bigger section about the thinking of Zelensky. So one thing that struck me about Zelensky is that he wants simple and easy solutions. He is not a big thinker. He's new to politics. When you look at his solutions for fighting corruption in Ukraine, he wants investment nannies. He doesn't want complicated, difficult, bureaucratic programs. He wants easy, simple solutions to fix problems. You know, that's nice. It sounds good. It plays well in the polls, but that's not politics, and that's not reality. When you talk to most analysts who follow NATO and the kind of pathway that it would take for Ukraine to join NATO, we're looking at least 10 years. And Zelensky came to Washington and he expected Biden to make some kind of statement. And Biden said, look, I favor it, but it's not up to me. We're also depending on the Europeans. It's not just a decision I can make. So I think that President Biden over the next couple of years in his relations with Zelensky is going to spend a lot of time, and his staff is going to spend a lot of time setting expectations that these big things that you want, yes, it's good to be ambitious. It's good to want peace. It's good to want to make Ukraine rich, but these big ambitions are not attainable in the next year or two. And you know, joining NATO is not just signing statements and having a press conference. So I think that's a big problem within the Zelensky administration and within the thinking. Volodymyr, I think that your paper it has some really good points. I think that it would benefit from more specificity. In certain places, you say that the United States helped with defense spending or helped with anti-corruption or domestic reform. I would urge you to make that more specific and put real numbers behind it. And I think that it would also benefit from a discussion of how things look in Washington. So yes, you're right. You talk about how there's strong support for Ukraine on Capitol Hill. That's absolutely true. You see there's strong support for Ukraine among the public. I think that's less true. I would go back and look at some numbers on that. I think it's definitely true among the diaspora. I'm not sure it's true among the general public. But I would urge you to add a section about President Biden. Yes, I think you're right that President Biden knows a lot about Ukraine. He was actively involved in the discussions when he was the vice president. And I think most of us in Washington expected him to play a greater role and have more interest. But that's not the way the cards are going to turn out this time. He's very, very focused on COVID, climate, and China. Those are his big priorities. When you look at his interim national security strategy, he mentions Ukraine 0 times. He mentions China 15 times, and he mentions Russia 5 times. So it's not in the cards, just given the other priorities. And when you look at the immediate circle around him and the people who are making decisions on Eastern Europe, they're realists. And they don't have the same kind of priorities that the previous administrations have had. So I don't know that there's going to be a lot of attention in this administration. So I would recalibrate the paper based on sort of the immediate circle around Zelensky. I think you're right, though, that there's no consensus on the importance of Ukraine in Washington. I think that's an open debate right now, and people are trying to sort that out. We still don't have an assistant secretary for Europe. We're still waiting for Congress to confirm her. We finally have a deputy assistant secretary. But when you look at the people who are involved in Ukraine policy, there's no strong person who has President Biden's ear who can push for Ukraine. And that's going to be a problem. I think too, I would add, Volodymyr, you say that the Biden administration is very fixated on China. That's absolutely right. But I would add another point. I think the Biden administration isn't very good at policy implementation. And I think you could point a finger at the State Department here, and you could look at what it did in Afghanistan and also with the recent issue over Australia and submarines. So let me turn to Misha. Misha, I love your energy. You forgot to do Budma is supposed to be 3 times is my understanding. I thought it was Budma, Budma, Budma. But congratulations on a good paper. I think that your paper confirms what we know, and it gives us really good data for people in the policy world to point to. Washington has considerable leverage and goodwill in Ukraine, and we know that it's strongest in Western and Central Ukraine. I think that your paper is strongest on page 8 when you talk about what does the survey data mean, and your point that Washington-Kiev relations matter a lot with Russia is pivotal, and I think that that's a really important point. To put it really baldly, if you want Kiev to love you, you have to be tough on Moscow. And that's absolutely right. The list of policy priorities that you put out, I think are really interesting and worth repeating. And I think especially digging in on culture and technology are interesting points. My takeaway from your paper is that the United States needs to stress sovereignty and territorial integrity when it talks about anti-corruption and democracy programs. You said that talking about anti-corruption and democracy programs doesn't really change things in terms of public opinion on the Ukrainian side, but it's sovereignty that does. So making that connection, and Volodymyr talks about this connection and how the West sees these as tightly intertwined, I think is an important point. So thanks for your paper. There's one other area I would love you to say more on. You say that on page 3, you say that there's a reservoir of goodwill that's deep in Ukraine, and you say that you can see it even in the South and the East. I'd love to know if you have any ideas on policy ideas or programs to increase that goodwill in the South and the East, and if you would put a priority on the South over the East. Let's see. I have comments on Sebastian's proposal, but I don't know if he's back or if I should just hold those. What do you want me to do, Ira?
I think he's not here. So
Is he
I
back?
think Henry, what would you say? I think it doesn't have much sense, to comment on him while he did not bring his presentation to the end. He just started with his presentation.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
I think let's wait. Hopefully he'll be able to rejoin before the end. And if he rejoins, he can complete it, and then you can give the comments then. Otherwise, we can just move on with what we've got.
Sure. Okay.
Okay.
I think the last comment that I would make, I forgot this when I was talking to Volodymyr. You were discussing the White House meeting between Zelensky and Biden, and it's really interesting that our expectations. I think Ukrainian analysts like you and American analysts who follow Ukraine were totally wrong about Biden. We expected him to really spend a lot of time and interest on Ukraine since he had done that before, especially on the corruption portfolio. And in the meeting that he had, you rightfully pointed out, it went longer than expected, but there was no mention of corruption. They only talked about security issues and they talked about NATO. So Zelensky was basically given a free pass. And the other thing that I think that's worth mentioning is Zelensky is very, very pushy, and his attitude is different. It's even pushier than Poroshenko's towards the West. He's treating the West right now as if you owe me, and maybe he's right after Trump. But there's definitely an attitude change. He pushed very, very hard on NATO membership, and he's given several interviews that I think are interesting and show exactly what you said, that Ukraine is probably moving in a different direction, which points to Alexander Sushko's point. And Sebastian is back. So should we turn the floor over to him? If he's here?
Just, Melinda, are you ready with your comments for the other three papers? Melinda, can you hear me?
Yes, that's what I have to say about Ukraine. I think Sebastian is back now, though.
Okay. So if Sebastian is there, so we are waiting for him.
Yeah, I'm here. I don't know what you could hear because I even didn't realize that I was disconnected. So I don't know what you could hear from my memo where it interrupted. I have no idea.
So I think you was exactly at the beginning.
Okay, so I guess I should start over a little bit. I mean, I should. What should I do? Okay.
You should. I think you should start your presentation, but please be very, 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 very good with time, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So I was explaining why a research on Islamic civil society. I mean, I was trying to explain that in contemporary Western discussions on the future of Central Asia, the topic and the role of Muslim civil society are often ignored or left aside due to lack of information, or it is even avoided due to political concerns. So Muslim civil society actually has been frowned upon, for example, for not defending the values of the classic NGOs world, or not necessarily endorsing Western-style parliamentary democracy. And also some Muslim organizations are or can be directly linked to foreign governments, which act as charitable hands of countries like Kuwait or Saudi Arabia or Iran. And some Muslim civil society organizations have close links with particular political organizations or underground movements, for example, with the Muslim Brotherhood or the Hizb ut-Tahrir. And of course, a few of them may be connected to foreign terrorist groups. And also Central Asian governments themselves fail to see, or I would say are unwilling to recognize a civil society in general, and even less any Islam-based legitimacy which would compete with their authority. So Central Asian secular and authoritarian governments have sought to muzzle the emergence of Islamic civil society. But like secular civil society, Muslim civil society is of variable geometry. So the goal of our work is to go beyond this approach and to study the diversity of Muslim civil society. I mean, the diversity of its aims, of its actors, of its methods. And in Central Asia, so Muslim civil society includes actors like the Muftiyads, the mosques, the Jamaat, some Islamic charity foundations, madrasa, and NGOs. And Muslim civil societies have in common their commitment to improving their communities through philanthropic activities and through contributing to the development of the well-being of population at the local, but also at the national or at the international level. Some, some Muslim civil societies can be drivers for democratizations in Muslim countries and legitimate actors for building sustainable and locally anchored development mechanisms. So the role of Muslim civil society in Central Asia has much in common with the rest of civil society in terms of a desire to help society and to act as a channel for relaying societal views and concern to the government based on the belief that civil society has a deeper grassroots knowledge of local context and of where there may be gaps in what the government is providing. So in Central Asia, you have numerous charitable associations which are active in multiple social niches, such as healthcare, the fight against poverty, education, conflict resolution, and community-based justice. And we also see the emergence of associations which are funded by local actors and which are campaigning for the improvement of women's rights within the framework of Islamic values, or fighting for a more efficient government. For example, improving the implementation of legal decisions, developing transportation networks between suburbs and city centers, or respecting property rights, etc. So I'd like to mention that this research has been carried out on the basis of 5 to 10 interviews with representatives of Muslim civil society in Kazakhstan, in Kyrgyzstan, in Tajikistan, and in Uzbekistan. We chose not to conduct interviews in Turkmenistan due to the lack of civil society and the extreme repression in the country, which would have made interviewing dangerous. And I should say that even in the other Central Asian countries, the conduct of some interviews was difficult due to an atmosphere of control and repression concerning religious activism in most places, the reluctance of potential interviewees to discuss a subject that remains politically sensitive in all the region, and potential interviewees fear actually of reprisal from political and administrative authorities. I specify that the interviews we conducted represent only a sample of the diversity of Muslim civil society organizations in the region, and do not include organizations that may fall on the more radical end of the spectrum. So this paper is not intended to explore any possible relationship between Muslim civil society in Central Asia and radical or terrorist organizations. So to wrap up, we think that it's essential to inquire about the full spectrum of the moral, ethical, community social role of Islam, rather than focusing strictly on its political, ideological role in Central Asia, or its possible links to violent extremism or terrorism. This memo argues actually the importance of taking into account the impact of the emergence of an indigenous or Islamic-oriented path towards development. And Muslim civil society organizations are likely to be increasingly important actors in Central Asia. So for Western policymakers, as well as for Central Asian governments, understanding how and why Muslim civil society organizations work, how they interact with local communities, and how they view their role in connection with governments and other entities can help inform possible cooperation with them. There are, of course, potential obstacles to working with Muslim civil society organizations in Central Asia, including, for example, concerns about vetting for possible connections to radical groups or local governments, regulations, or fear, or working methods which may not readily match donor requirements. But Muslim civil society organizations have the potential to bring their local connections and knowledge to bear in making policies and programs, particularly those concerning development and social assistance, more effective. And I will stop here.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. We did it.
Yes.
Melinda, could you please make maybe comments on Sebastian's paper?
Sure, thank you. Sebastian, congratulations. I think this is really an excellent paper on a subject that is not well understood. So I just want to congratulate you and your co-author. I can't wait to read the full report. I understand that USIP is going to publish it next month, so please share it with this group. I think your point that Muslim civil society organizations are going to be increasingly important actors in Central Asia is dead on, and that Central Asian governments view them as potential rivals. I think that's a really interesting point to develop as well. I think the point that I found most interesting in your short synopsis is that Muslim civil society has been frowned upon for not defending the values of classic NGOs, which are seen as sort of liberal, in not endorsing gender equality or Western-style parliamentary democracy. So there's a tension both with the Western classic NGO world and also with Central Asian governments. There's tensions with both of those. I think that just this short paper would have benefited from an example or two showing the tensions between Muslim civil society organizations in the state, but I think that will be in your bigger paper. So that's, not a critique. And, if you had that evidence, I think you could make the claim. The reality is that Muslim civil society organizations are not that all different from Christian or Jewish civil society organizations.
Absolutely.
That's a claim that I'd like you to be able to make, but you would need more evidence to make that. But I think it's a really excellent paper, and I can't wait to read the longer version. Thank you, and it's great to see you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Melinda. So, dear panelists, what we do now we do the following thing. We have two questions or comments from Lubov Ostrovska. One goes to Volodymyr and the other goes to Alexander. And I will read these comments in a minute. But what I propose to do that after I read these questions, you will have you will have the floor one by one, starting from Mikhail in the same order, and then answering the comments of Melinda. Please also answer to what Lubov Ostrovska wrote in the chat. And to Volodymyr, she wrote that corruption results in inability to resolve the issues and in putting artificial barriers for issues resolution. What exactly would you recommend to overcome corruption? And what exactly your department at the National University does in this direction? This is a good question, I mean, absolutely concrete question. And to Alexander, I think the most effective approach to US-Ukraine EU collaboration versus integration is assessment of viability of collaborative projects, their usefulness for population and social impact. So now what we do now, as I said, we start with Mikhail. Mikhail, where is Mikhail?
Thanks. Thank you very much. And since I spoke a little bit longer during my presentation, I'll keep the comments a bit shorter now. So to take the Melinda's, thank you for the comments and the reading of the papers on the support and assessment of US strategy. Well, it's that data that basically shows that even though you have more divergence in the assessment of benefits from collaboration and influence, but you still have, even in the East, right, kind of mid-level assessment of cooperation being a high strategic priority. And a lot of it may rest on hopes that won't run forever, as Alexander says. But as far as targeting specific projects, I think there is obviously an opportunity to develop collaboration that would benefit both the South and the East if you go by industry necessarily, not the region. And that might be worth listening to what Zelensky proposed and those, I think, 25 points that the commissions will be working on mutual cooperation. But if you think of the capabilities Dnipro and Zaporizhia and Kharkiv, from machine building to nuclear physics research, you do have possibility to actual collaboration rather than just kind of handouts and traditional, USAID type assistance. I think I would put an emphasis on that. And that would also actually create the incentive to work against corruption. Because then if you reduce corruption, you can increase that kind of collaboration. It would help sovereignty and maintaining, right, Ukraine's position. Very quickly on Alexander's point, I had focus groups in Ukraine, and in Drushkivka, in Donbass, in Mariupol, in Kiev, and Lviv, and Odessa. And I did hear that sentiment, that isolationist sentiment rising. So definitely something to pay attention to. How long would Ukraine believe that they can be kind of a forever bride of NATO, right?
Thank you very much, Mikhail. This was good more indeed. Yes.
Thanks.
I'm so sorry. Didn't notice the question from Vladimir Kulik. Vladimir, please.
Right, thank you. Well, I don't know exactly how to answer the question from the chat.
I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. So I didn't mean you. I'm sorry because there is a question. You will be up after the Vladimir Kulik. So sorry, Vladimir.
Oh,
so this
okay.
is another Vladimir. So this is a question from Vladimir Kulik.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I have a question for Alexander Sushko, also in view of what Melinda was saying. To me, it seems like, I wonder if you would agree with that observation. To me, it seems like there are two different sources of this West fatigue. One is the lack of awareness or unwillingness to understand that it's not just Ukraine will be magically accepted into Western institutions. Ukraine need to proceed with some reforms and do some preparation. But on the other hand, there is a growing understanding, or at least perception, that no matter what Ukraine does, reform-like, West will still be wary of accepting Ukraine not only into NATO, but also in the EU, which is supposedly economic and political union, because of security consideration, because of Russia. And so this realization that we will never be good enough because no matter what we do is many countries in the West, such as France and Germany, will still be against Ukraine's admission, is more counterproductive. And I believe that the West should respond to these two things differently. In the first case, maybe it's important just to remind Ukraine that there is a procedure, there are a list of reform, there are certain requirements. In the second case, there should be some correction on the part of the Western leaders. So assure Ukraine that it's not about Russia. Assure Ukraine that the conflict with Russia is not a barrier to Ukraine's admission, and demonstrations that after the certain procedure, Ukraine will be admitted. Would you agree to that?
Okay, thank you very much, Volodymyr Kulik. Alexander, please, when responding to the comments of Melinda, of Lubov Ostrovta, please also take consideration of the Volodymyr Kulik's question. And Vladimir Dubovik, please.
Okay, so I go next, right?
Yes.
Okay, all right, good. I got confused, but I mean, of course, you have too many Volodymyrs to cope with, so. Yeah, right. So, well, I'm not sure how to answer the question from the chat, frankly, because the corruption is a huge issue. There's been tons of literature on this. You know, there are many reasons. We can do another day-long conference on this, why it's not working here in Ukraine, or not working to the extent that we would like it to work. Quite recently, I got familiar with a new book, relatively new book by Eric Heron, a good colleague of ours, on this, why many corruption efforts in Ukraine are failing. And then on Melinda's comments, thank you first of all for your recommendations. One short remark is actually on Assistant Secretary on Europe of State, Karen Donfred, moving forward. I just discovered that hours ago it was announced that she would be having confirmation vote next week. So actually, this administration has only pushed just 1/4 of national security nominations requiring Senate confirmation through the Senate. And many of our good friends are still waiting there, including Celeste Wallen, a good friend of ours, the founder of Corner. She's still in the waiting room. And that's a problem because a lot of people like Ted Cruz and others are saying, we're helping Ukraine by holding those nominations. They're actually holding nominations of people who are responsible for Ukrainian dimension of the US foreign policy, who will be responsible for making decisions and to help Ukraine. So it's a kind of vicious circle. on Zelensky's thinking. That's a good topic for a big book, maybe of political psychology or something like that. Not necessarily someone like myself who is dealing with IR and foreign policy analysis. Sometimes I wonder, I don't know, what he does, what he says. Is it that he is naive, that he is immature, that he doesn't know what he's talking about, or does he do it for the reason? Let's take this, Mr. Biden. Why are we not in NATO? Still, we're not in NATO. Does it mean that he doesn't know how it works, or does it mean that he knows exactly how it works, but still he says it because he's catering to this electorate, maybe that Alexander Sushko has spoke about in his presentation? Or rather, I think he's actually feeding that attitude and that narrative in Ukrainian society. And I tend to think that it's actually the latter, because I think that Zelensky is pushy indeed, and he's rocking the boat, he's breaking China, and he is damaging relations. And I'm afraid that if he continues to do that, he would actually move US-Ukraine relations to a different level. But that will be a lower level comparing to what it was before. So I think that he is to blame for the current problems and frictions, that he is responsible for a lot of this misunderstanding and distrust and this unrealistic demands on the West or US or whoever. And also I hope that Alexander Sushko is probably right in terms of explaining what's going on in Kyiv, what moods are there, but there is a limit. There is no alternative for Ukraine. We cannot be another Israel. We cannot rebalance to China. So if we turn away from the West, we turn away from the West, and we are remaining against this huge Russian aggression that is facing us. And that's it. So it's basically no alternative for us other than working with Americans and other friends in the West, be it security or energy or trade or what have you, investment, what have you. And most finally, I hope that the attitudes towards the US will go pick up and Zelensky would not damage them for a long time. Because actually this debate now in Ukraine, what I'm hearing these days, and people are following Zelensky, reminds me of a famous Monty Python sketch of what the Romans ever done for us. What America's done for us. Seriously? They're giving us $600 to $700 million each year in various fields. They're supporting us in the Security Council. They helped us to withstand this Russian escalation on our borders in the spring. And the list goes on and on and on. And yet Zelensky is talking, and people who follow his suit, they're talking about what Americans are doing for us, when they're gonna start helping us. I think it's very counterproductive and it's very hurtful. And I'm afraid that there could be damage done by Kyiv in terms of the future of US-Ukraine relations.
Thank you very much, Volodymyr, for very, very, very clear answers, because we need clear answers, I think. Alexander Sushko, now the floor is yours. Please.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I have a few questions. And first of all, thank you, Melinda, for your immediate reaction on my points. And certainly I will deliver more substantive argumentation in my memo next week. It will be here. And I just may say you that there are a few dimensions, different ones. So one is regarding the wider public. And here we have a very interesting combination. And I'm sure Mikhail knows it well, that for example, it depends on how you put the question. The answer may vary. And if you want to prove that Ukrainians are not willing or not believe in the future relationships with the West, you can prove it with some data. For example, when you ask people, there is a public opinion poll recently published regarding the defense, whom we can expect to defend Ukraine, and over 55% said that only it depends on Ukraine. So there is no way to get any direct help from any foreign country when the conflict with Russia appears. And only 15% say that we may rely to get support from the EU and NATO if the conflict escalates. So only 15%. This is certainly, it depends how we interpret and which kind of opinion poll we take. But there are visible signs of skepticism on the side of Ukrainian people. And maybe it's realistic skepticism, but again, this is the balance is very important. So, then the question on I got few comments, and first there was very extensive, quite substantive question of Volodymyr Kulik, and there are few elements of this story, so it's not easy to respond immediately. But yes, I understand that there is absolutely different logic when we hear something, either complaints on the Ukrainian side or some skepticism or criticism towards the West. And certainly we have to differentiate what is the reason of these complaints, what is the substance, what is behind of these complaints, and then react respectively. I think that certainly there is the problem of the long-term vision when it comes to the Western perception of Ukraine and its future relationships. Certainly we have to acknowledge that there is no agreement in the West with regards to the final point, or either it is a destination for Ukraine to be a member of the EU or not, either it is a destination for Ukraine to be a member of NATO or not. There is no consensus. And unfortunately, we have to live with that now. And sometimes it also generates additional skepticism in the society. And also it is also maybe used as a tool of manipulating by public opinion. So I think that certainly we may differentiate when it comes to the lack of reforms and something which Ukraine can change. And there are also things which Ukraine cannot change, but it should some way interpret this. So for people, for media, for themselves, I mean, Ukrainian leaders. And here, for example, I also have a difficulty to explain why this Bucharest summit wording about the future membership in NATO for Ukraine and Georgia, why it was so difficult even to repeat the same language in the recent documents of NATO, and why this 13 years, which makes us 13, this language is 13 years ago old, yeah, and so nothing has changed. So you see how much has changed in the world these 13 years, but this language not changed. We are still there. We are still there. Nothing changed. As for Lyubov question, this is rather not a question by but the comment. I totally agree that all these programs and I would say directions of cooperation should be accurately evaluated. That is true. At the same time, I would argue against too much technical approach to the relationships. If there is no strategic perspective, any technical assessment would not help us. And this is also part of the truth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alexander. Sebastian.
Yeah, thank you very much, Melinda, for your comments. I mean, so the main point on this multiple or this double dimension of conflict between, on the one hand, the Muslim civil society organizations with the government, the Central Asian governments, and with Western countries. I mean, if I put it shortly, I mean, Central Asian governments view Muslim civil society as full of organizations which are either defending the Sharia, which might be for some of them true, but at the same time, it depends how Muslim civil society views the Sharia, because for many of them, it just means that they want to have access to more justice in the countries where justice is extremely corrupt. Or the governments, Central Asian governments also view these Muslim civil society organizations as willing to involve more Islam in the political life of their country, due to the fact that they consider that secular regimes are not able to answer all their questions and to fix all the issues. And on the other hand, you have Western countries which are also reluctant to cooperate with the Muslim civil society organization for the same reason, in a way, as the Central Asian governments. Plus also the fact is, for some of them, I mean, for some of the Muslim civil society organizations which defend actually the regime's authoritarianism, which considers that it's a symbol of a guarantee of stability. But I mean, generally speaking, what is really striking in all the interviews we conduct is the diversity of approaches of the Muslim civil society organization, you know, going from some really supporting the Sharia, some really supporting a Western style of democracy, some willing to cooperate with the government, some being much more reluctant to cooperate with the government, and same with Western countries. And it just brings me to your point on Christian movements and Jewish communities. Indeed, that's a very important point. So that's why, in a way, it's even more surprising that Western countries, in a way, systematize too much the activities of Muslim civil society organizations, while at the same time, as you know, there are plenty of Christian movements which are very active in the region, and which are Christian movements which are which developed in Central Asia, but many of them are supported by Western countries. So I stop here. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Sebastian. Thank you very much. And at this point, may I say you that we are done with this panel, and I want to thank you very dearly, very sincerely, all our panelists. And Melinda is a fantastic discussant. And let me also use this opportunity to thank the PONAS for this panel especially, and for the whole conference generally. And now I pass the floor for the concluding words of for Henry Hale. Henry, yes? This is what I should do. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ira, for chairing a great panel, and to everyone who's participated, speakers, discussants, chairs, and everybody who's attended and contributed comments and discussions. I think this has been a great way to help kind of get our institute off to the year when it's celebrating its 60th anniversary. A long time ago, it was the Sino-Soviet Institute, and then in the 1990s evolved into IRIS, where it is now. So if you're interested, there's a list of activities and different events and some history of the Institute that you can find at iris.org or through the PONARS website at ponarseurasia.org. Of course, conference also couldn't take place at all without really hard work from the whole IRIS team. Of course, Director Marlene Laruelle, Matt Cooley, who runs the administrative side of things, and the rest of the IRIS team, and of course, Alexander Schmemann, our managing editor, and John Schrobach, all of who played a massive role in just organizing and getting this whole thing going. And of course, just want to thank the Elliott School and Carnegie Corporation of New York and George Washington University more broadly for supporting everything on the financial and organizational side. So with that, I'm happy to wrap up. I think it was great virtually, although I do look forward to the time we can all get together in person and have those chats in the hallways and over meals that we all enjoy. But stay safe, and we'll see you again hopefully soon.
Thank you.